I used to think fear was a kind of alarm, a loud, undeniable thing that yanked you out of bad places before they could finish chewing you up. I believed that for 34 years. Then I lost my warehouse job, fell 3 months behind on rent, watched my truck get repossessed in the middle of a Tuesday, and learned the truth. Fear isn't an alarm. Fear is a luxury. People who run from frightening places are people who have somewhere else to be. The rest of us stand still, clock in, and pretend our hands aren't shaking, because the landlord doesn't care what we saw at 3 in the morning. He cares about the 5th of the month. I'm telling this the way it happened, because I need someone to know, not to believe me, just to know. The mall is still standing out there off the old county highway, and somewhere in its directory my name is probably still blinking, waiting for me to come back and finish a patrol I never closed out. I got the job through a temp listing that didn't even have the company's full name, just initials, a phone number, and the words overnight security, immediate start, no experience necessary. I called from the parking lot of a gas station because my phone was about to be cut off. A woman with a smoker's voice asked me 3 questions. Was I a felon? Could I walk? For 8 hours. Could I start that night? I said no, yes, yes. She told me to be at the East Service entrance at 10 p.m. and to bring a flashlight if I had one. The mall was called Brightfield Galleria once. The sign out front still said it, though half the letters had gone dark and the ones that worked buzzed in that sick yellow way that old sodium bulbs do right before they die. The parking lot was a cracked gray ocean, big enough for 2,000 cars, holding maybe 4. Weeds came up through the asphalt in long, crooked seams, like the ground underneath was trying to remember how to be a field again. I parked near the service entrance and sat there for a minute with the engine off, listening to the lot lights hum. There's a particular sound a dying mall makes at night. It's not silence. It's the sound of a thing too big to be empty, full of HVAC ghosts and refrigeration units that never got unplugged, and pipes settling in walls nobody walks past anymore. You can hear the size of it before you ever go inside. The man who met me at the door was named Mr. Halpern. He was the property manager, though I think by that point he was the only employee the ownership group still had on payroll besides us guards. He was somewhere past 60, thin in the way men get when they've stopped enjoying food, and he wore a tie, even though nobody had seen him during business hours in years. Because there were no business hours anymore. The interior stores had all gone dark by then. The anchors had pulled out. The food court was a row of shuttered metal grates with old menu boards still glowing above them, advertising combo meals at 2014 prices. He walked me through the security office without small talk. There was a wall of CCTV monitors, maybe 16 screens, most of them working, a few showing nothing but gray snow. There was a desk with a physical logbook on it, the kind with a stitched cloth spine and a date stamped at the top of every page. There was a handheld patrol scanner on a charging cradle, the type that beeps when you wave it over a checkpoint chip on the wall. There was a radio. There was a coffee maker that looked older than I was. He handed me a laminated sheet and told me to read it twice before my first patrol, and then to read it again at the start of every shift for as long as I worked there. He said it like a man reciting a prayer he no longer believed in, but still respected. Follow the patrol route exactly. Do not skip checkpoints. Do not add new ones. Scan every chip in the order printed on the route map. If a store door is found open, report it on the radio, log the time, and continue your patrol. Do not enter alone. After midnight, ignore any announcement that comes over the PA system. The PA is supposed to be off after closing. If you hear it, it is not for you. If someone calls your name from inside a closed store, do not answer and do not stop walking. If your name appears on the mall directory, on a CCTV monitor, on a printed receipt, or anywhere in the logbook in handwriting that is not yours, photograph it with the company phone and leave that section of the building immediately. End every patrol by writing a handwritten entry in the logbook. Sign with your full legal name. Do not abbreviate. I read it twice in front of him, like he asked. I remember thinking it sounded like the kind of overcautious nonsense that lawyers write to keep insurance premiums low. Don't enter closed stores alone. Sure. Liability. Don't answer if someone calls your name. Probably to discourage guards from chasing squatters into dark places where they could get hurt. The directory rule was strange, but I figured it was about graffiti, about kids who broke in and tagged the old screens, and the photograph was evidence. I told him I understood. He looked at me for a long second, then said something I didn't think about until much later. He said, "The rules aren't here to make you a better guard. They're here to make sure you stay yourself." Then he gave me the keys, the radio, and the scanner, and he went home. The pay was $16 an hour, cash on Fridays. No taxes taken out, no questions asked. For me, at that point, that was the difference between sleeping in my apartment and sleeping in my car. I would have agreed to almost anything. The first patrol took an hour and 20 minutes. The route started at the security office, went down the East Service corridor, came out by the dead food court, looped past the frozen escalators in the central atrium, climbed the stairs to the second level, traced the upper ring all the way around past every shuttered storefront, came down the west escalator, and ended back at the office through the loading dock corridor. There were 22 checkpoint chips bolted to the walls along the way, each one a little gray disc the size of a quarter. You waved the scanner at them, and it beeped and logged the time. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Damp concrete in the service corridors, old fryer grease in the food court that had soaked so deeply into the tiles that 30 years of mopping wouldn't lift it. And underneath everything, a faint chemical sweetness I eventually decided was the dust of old perfume samples from the department stores settled into the carpet. The second thing I noticed was the light. The fluorescents in the main concourse were on a reduced overnight cycle. Every third one lit, and half of those flickered. The floor was that polished cream tile malls used to love, and where the light hit it, it looked wet. I kept glancing down to see if I was stepping in something. I never was. The third thing I noticed, around checkpoint 9, was that my footsteps weren't quite matching my pace. There was a delay, just a half step long, a soft echo that didn't belong to the geometry of the corridor. I told myself it was the high ceiling. Sound does strange things in big, empty spaces. I'd been in enough warehouses to know that. I finished the loop. I wrote in the logbook. I signed my full legal name, Daniel Marcus Reyes, the way Halpern had instructed. I made a cup of bad coffee and watched the monitors until 5:30 when the daytime caretaker came in to unlock the loading dock for the cleaning contractor, who only came twice a week now. I drove home and slept until 2 in the afternoon. I cashed my first paycheck on Friday. I paid part of my back rent. The landlord didn't smile, but he stopped threatening me. That was enough. That was, honestly, more than I'd had in months. The second week is when small things started. On a Tuesday, around 2 in the morning, I was halfway through the upper ring when the patrol scanner beeped at me. Not a checkpoint beep. A different tone, lower, the one it used when it received a message from the central system. The little screen said, "Reroute. Proceed to checkpoint 17. I was standing at checkpoint 12. 17 was on the lower level, near the old jewelry store. There was no central system. Halpern had told me on day 1 that the dispatch function had been disabled when corporate cut the contract. The scanner was supposed to only log checkpoints, nothing else. I stared at the screen until the message blinked off on its own. I stood there in the dim light of the upper ring for a long time, listening to the building breathe. I didn't go to checkpoint 17 out of order. I followed the route exactly the way the rules said. When I got to 17 40 minutes later, there was nothing there. Just the scratched chip on the wall outside the closed jewelry store and the dark inside the gate where the display cases used to be. I scanned it. The scanner beeped normally. I moved on. When I got back to the office, I checked the scanner's message log. It was empty. No reroute had been recorded. I told myself the device was old. Halpern had said himself that the equipment was past its service life. I wrote in the logbook, signed my name, and went home. That weekend I bought groceries for the first time in 2 months. Real groceries. Eggs, bread, ground beef, an onion, a bag of oranges. I stood in my kitchen and ate a fried egg sandwich and almost cried. You have to understand what a job means when you've been without one. It's not about money. It's about being allowed back into the category of person who buys eggs. I was not going to lose this job over a glitchy scanner. The third week, I started hearing the vents. The HVAC at Brightfield was failing in patches. Some sections of the mall were cold enough that I could see my breath, and others were stagnant and warm, the air thick and tasting like old carpet. The vents themselves made noise. That was normal. Old metal ducts pop and tick as they expand and contract. I'd worked in buildings like that my whole life. But on a Wednesday night, walking through the East Service corridor, I heard something in the vent that sounded like a syllable, just one, a short, soft sound, like the tail end of a word. I stopped. I waited. It didn't come again. I told myself it was air pressure, a flap of metal somewhere upstream, the building exhaling. 2 nights later, in the same corridor, I heard it again, and this time it was longer. It sounded like the second half of my name, Yell. Like someone halfway through saying Daniel and getting cut off at the consonant. I stood under the vent for almost a full minute. The fluorescent above me flickered once, twice, then steadied. The vent was silent. I was tired. I had been working 5 nights a week for almost a month, sleeping in pieces during the day, and my body was confused about what hour it was supposed to be alive. I had read articles about auditory pareidolia, the way exhausted brains find words in random sound. I was a textbook case. I told myself this, and I believed it because I needed to believe it. I wrote in the logbook. I signed my full legal name. I went home. Around the end of the first month, a store light came on. I was on the upper ring, between checkpoints 14 and 15. Walking past what used to be a children's clothing store. The gate was down. The interior had been dark since I started. As I passed, a single fluorescent tube, somewhere deep in the back of the store, flickered to life. A weak, blue-white light, just enough to throw shapes against the back wall. I stopped. I shined my flashlight through the gate. I could see the old fixtures. The racks pushed against the walls, and 3 mannequins, 2 adults and 1 child. They were placed in the center of the store, facing outward, facing me. They were not dressed. The child mannequin had no arms. I stood there with my heart going hard in my chest, telling myself that mannequins don't move, that the light was on a faulty timer, that empty stores still had power for emergency lighting, and ballast failures could trigger random flickers, all of which was true, all of which was reasonable. I radioed it in to nobody, because the only other person on the radio was Halpern at home, and I wasn't going to wake him up over a light. I logged the time, I continued my patrol. When I came back around the upper ring 40 minutes later, the light was off again. The mannequins were in the same positions. Of course they were. Mannequins don't move. I wrote in the logbook. I signed my full legal name. I went home. Sometime in the 5th week, I started noticing the logbook. I was reading back through old entries, partly out of boredom, partly because Halpern had mentioned in passing that the previous guard, a man named Carl, had worked there for almost 2 years before leaving. I was curious what 2 years of nights in this building looked like in handwriting. Carl's entries were short and consistent. Date, time, route completed, no incidents. Signed Carl Weber. Page after page of no incidents, in the same tired, ballpoint cursive. Then, 3 weeks before his last entry, the handwriting started to change. The letters got smaller. The signatures got shakier. He started leaving notes. Lights on in 214 again. PA twice tonight. Ignored. Heard footsteps behind me on lower ring. Stopped when I stopped. Stayed in office last hour. Did not finish patrol. He'd written that last one, and then crossed it out so hard the pen had torn the page. The next entry, the next night, was just date, time, route completed, signed Carl Weber. Like nothing had happened. His final entry was unremarkable. Route completed. No incidents, signature. He'd quit by phone the next morning, Halpern told me later. Just called and said he wasn't coming back. Didn't pick up his last check. Halpern had it in a drawer, in the office, in an envelope with Carl's name on it, sitting there for over a year. I closed the logbook and put it back. I didn't write that night about what I'd read. I didn't think it was my business. But the next night, when I opened the logbook to start my entry, there was already writing on the page. The date for that night's shift, in the upper corner, in handwriting that was not mine. The entry slot was empty, but at the very bottom of the page, in the margin, 3 words. Welcome back, Danny. Nobody at that mall called me Danny. I had introduced myself to Halpern as Daniel. My ID said Daniel. The paychecks said Daniel. I had not been called Danny since I was a child. My grandmother had called me Danny. She had been dead for 19 years. I sat in the chair in the security office, and I stared at those 3 words for what felt like a long time. The fluorescent above the desk hummed. One of the CCTV monitors was showing static. The second one from the left on the bottom row. The coffee maker ticked as it cooled. The rule said, if your name appears on the mall directory, on a CCTV monitor, on a printed receipt, or anywhere in the logbook in handwriting that is not yours, photograph it with the company phone and leave that section of the building immediately. The company phone was a battered old smartphone that lived in the desk drawer. I took it out. I opened the camera. I photographed the page. Then I sat there. Leaving that section of the building immediately meant leaving the security office. The security office was where the monitors were. The monitors were how you watched the mall. If I left the office, I wasn't doing my job. If I wasn't doing my job and Halpern checked the cameras, I'd be fired. If I was fired, I'd lose the apartment. If I lost the apartment, I would be back in my car in November with no job history that would explain a 4-month gap working for a mall that didn't really exist on paper anymore. I told myself the rule was about the section of the building where the name appeared. The name had appeared in the logbook. The logbook lived in the office, so technically I should leave the office. But that didn't make practical sense. The office was the safest part of the building. The office had the radio and the door and the lights. I made a deal with myself. I would finish the patrol. I would not look at the logbook again. I would write my entry on a separate sheet of paper and tuck it into the book. I would not read what was written above it. Tomorrow, I would tell Halpern about it and let him handle it. I went on patrol. The mall felt different that night. It's hard to explain. The geometry was the same, but the spaces felt longer. The walk between checkpoints 6 and 7, which usually took me about 90 seconds, took almost 3 minutes. I checked my watch twice to be sure. The fluorescent lights flickered in patterns that almost looked like rhythm. My footsteps echoed at a delay I could no longer convince myself was normal acoustics. At checkpoint 13, on the upper ring, the PA system clicked on. It was 1:47 a.m. The PA was supposed to be off. The rules said, after midnight, ignore any announcement that comes over the PA. The PA is supposed to be off after closing. If you hear it, it is not for you. A voice came over the speakers. It was a woman's voice, professional, the kind of voice that used to read mall announcements in the 90s. Soft, neutral, slightly nasal. Note, she said, "Attention shoppers, we hope you are enjoying your visit to Brightfield Galleria. The Lost and Found is located on the lower level near the central fountain. Tonight we have a young boy, approximately 7 years old, brown hair, blue jacket, answers to Danny. If this is your child, please come to the lower level information desk to claim him. Thank you for shopping at Brightfield." I kept walking. I didn't stop. I didn't look at the speakers. I scanned checkpoint 14. I scanned checkpoint 15. I kept walking. I had a blue jacket when I was 7. I had brown hair. I had been to a mall once with my grandmother when I was that age, not Brightfield, somewhere else, somewhere that had closed long before I was old enough to remember its name. She had lost track of me for a few minutes near a fountain. A woman at an information desk had given me a paper cup of water and let me sit on a stool until my grandmother found me. I had not thought about that in 30 years. I had not told anyone about it, ever. It wasn't a story. It was just a small piece of childhood that lived in the back of my head. The mall knew it. I finished the patrol. My hands were shaking by the end. I came back to the office. I wrote on a separate sheet of paper, tucked it into the logbook without looking at the existing pages, and I sat in the chair and I waited for the cleaning contractor to come at 5:30. When Halpern came in that morning, I told him about the logbook. I didn't tell him about the PA. I don't know why. I think I was already starting to feel like the PA had been for me, and that talking about it would be admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. He listened. He nodded. He opened the logbook to the page I'd shown him. The handwriting was gone. The page was blank, except for my entry on the separate sheet. He looked at me with a kind of tired patience. He said, "Did you photograph it?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Good. Send the photograph to my email and delete it from the phone. Don't show anyone else. Don't talk about it." I asked him what was happening. I asked him point blank. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The building has been here a long time. A lot of people came through it when it was alive. Some of those people left more of themselves here than others. The rules keep things separate. Follow the rules and you'll be fine." I asked him if Carl had followed the rules. He looked at me and he said, "Carl was a good guard." Then he stood up and put on his coat and went home. I should have quit that morning. I want to be clear about that. I should have walked out and never come back. I knew it. I felt it in my chest, the entire drive home. But I had just made my full rent payment for the first time in over a year. I had a working refrigerator with food in it. I had a phone that wasn't on the verge of being cut off. I had bought a new pair of work boots because my old ones had a hole in the sole. I was sleeping in a bed. If I quit, I lost all of that within a month. I told myself the rules worked. I told myself Halpern had clearly been doing this a long time and clearly knew how to handle it. I told myself if I just kept following the rules, the way Carl had for 2 years, I'd be fine. Carl had quit eventually, sure, but Carl had quit on his own terms, after 2 years of paychecks. 2 years would change my life. 2 years would mean savings. 2 years would mean I never had to be that man in the gas station parking lot again. I went back the next night. I want to skip ahead, because the next 2 months had a sameness to them that I can't fully describe. The events repeated and escalated, but the pattern was always the same. The mall would do something small. I would explain it away. The mall would do something larger. I would follow the rules. I would write in the logbook. I would sign my full legal name. I would go home. I would cash my check on Friday. I would pay my bills. I would come back. The PA spoke to me 11 more times. I learned to hum to myself when I heard it click on, to fill my own ears with sound so I couldn't catch the words. It still got through sometimes. It told me about a wallet that had been turned in, brown leather, contained a photograph of a woman named Marisol. Marisol was my mother's name. She had died when I was 12. I had carried a photograph of her in my wallet for years afterward, until the wallet was stolen out of a locker at a job I had when I was 20. I had not told a single person at Brightfield any of this. The PA knew. The CCTV started showing me things. Not often, once or twice a week. Movement in corridors I had just walked through, a figure passing through frame and gone before I could focus on it. Once, on the monitor for the upper ring, I saw a guard walking the route. He was scanning checkpoints. He was wearing my uniform. I watched him for almost a full minute before I realized I was watching myself, but the timestamp on the monitor was 30 minutes ahead of the actual time. I was watching a patrol I hadn't done yet. I made myself look away. I did the patrol 30 minutes later. Everything went exactly the way the monitor had shown it. I tried very hard not to think about what that meant. The directory in the central atrium, the big lit map with the "You are here" arrow, started showing my name, not as a label, as an entry in the store list, down at the bottom, in the same font as the other stores. Ray's, D, lower level. There was no store with that name. The lower level was almost entirely shuttered. I photographed it. I left the section. I told Halpern. He nodded and said, "Keep following the rules." The scanner kept rerouting me. I kept ignoring it. Footsteps kept echoing out of sync with mine. I kept walking at a steady pace. Store lights kept turning on as I passed. I kept logging the times. And every night, every single night, I came back to the office, and I wrote my entry, and I signed my full legal name, Daniel Marcus Reyes, with the same pen, in the same handwriting, on the same kind of page, the way I had been told. I was so tired. I want to talk about the tiredness, because I think it matters. By the 3rd month, I wasn't sleeping properly during the day. I would lie in bed with the curtains drawn and hear the PA in my head, hear the soft echo of footsteps, see the directory entry every time I closed my eyes. When I did sleep, I dreamed about the patrol route. I dreamed about scanning checkpoints in an order that wasn't the right order. I would wake up with my hand cramped from gripping a phantom scanner. I lost weight. I stopped shaving regularly. I told myself this was just what night shift did to people. It was. It is. But it was also more than that. And I knew it. And I kept going. The thing that finally broke the pattern happened in the 4th month. It was a Thursday in late February. The heating in the mall had failed in 3 more sections. I was wearing my jacket over my uniform. I could see my breath in the upper ring. The fluorescents were flickering more than usual, and one of the CCTV monitors had gone fully dark, the screen cold and dead. I started my patrol at 11 p.m. I scanned checkpoint 1. I scanned checkpoint 2. At checkpoint 3, in the East Service Corridor, I heard a voice. It wasn't the PA. It wasn't the vent. It was a clear, conversational voice coming from inside the closed appliance store I was walking past. The gate was down. The interior was dark. The voice said, "Danny, come here for a second. I want to show you something." It was my grandmother's voice. I had not heard her voice in 19 years. I want you to understand, I had no recordings of her, no videos. She had died before any of that was easy to keep. Her voice had been fading from my memory for almost 2 decades. I wasn't even sure I remembered it accurately anymore. But the voice in the appliance store was hers, exactly hers, the way she said Danny with a slight lift on the second syllable. The way her vowels softened at the end of sentences because she'd grown up speaking Spanish at home before English. It was her. The rule said, if someone calls your name from inside a closed store, do not answer and do not stop walking. I stopped walking. I didn't answer. I want to be clear about that. I followed the rule that far, but I stopped. My feet stopped. My body stopped. I stood in front of that gate in the dim corridor, and I listened. She said, "Danny, it's been so long, mijo. Come closer so I can see you. I haven't seen you in such a long time." I started crying. I want to be honest about that too. I stood in that corridor in my cheap uniform jacket, and I cried like a child. I had not properly grieved her. I had been 12 when she died, and there had not been time or space or money for grief. We had moved twice in the year after. My mother had been struggling. There had been other things. I had folded my grandmother into a small box inside myself and kept walking. And now, 22 years later, in a dying mall at midnight, the box was open and I couldn't get it shut again. She said, "Danny, just unlock the gate. I want to show you something." The keys were on my belt. I had a master key for every store gate in the building. I had used it twice in 4 months, both times with Halpern present to check on alarms. My hand drifted toward the keys. I want you to know I was not in control of my hand. I was somewhere else. I was 12. I was in a hospital corridor that smelled like floor wax. I was being told to be brave for my mother. I was eating a vending machine sandwich because nobody had remembered I hadn't had dinner. My fingers touched the key ring. The radio on my shoulder crackled. It wasn't a voice. It was just static, a long burst of it, loud enough that it broke through whatever was happening to me. I jerked. My hand came away from the keys. I looked at the radio. The little green light was on. The static cut off. The light went out. Halpern was at home asleep. There was nobody on the other end of that radio. There never had been. I stepped back from the gate. The voice from inside the store said, "Danny, please, just for a minute." And then it changed. It shifted just slightly, the way a voice does when the speaker drops a pretense. It was still my grandmother's voice, but underneath it, threaded through it, was something else. Something patient and old and not in a hurry, because it had all night and tomorrow night and the night after that and a building full of nights to keep trying. I turned around and I walked back the way I had come. I did not run. I want you to know that. I walked because I knew if I ran, I would never stop. And if I stopped walking, the patrol, the cameras would catch it, and Halpern would see, and I would lose the job. I walked the rest of the route in the wrong direction. I scanned the checkpoints in reverse. I broke the rule about following the route exactly. I knew I was breaking it. I did it because I could not make my body walk back past the appliance store. When I got to the security office, I sat down at the desk and I put my hands flat on the wood and I waited until they stopped shaking. Then I opened the logbook to write my entry. The page for that night was already filled in. Not in my handwriting, in careful, tidy block letters, in the same blue ballpoint I had been using for 4 months. The entry said, "Route completed, in reverse. Checkpoint 3, incident noted. Subject, did not enter store. Signed, Daniel Marcus Reyes." The signature at the bottom was mine. It was exactly my signature. The way I crossed the T in Marcus, the little hook on the Y, the way I always ran out of pen ink on the S in Reyes and had to go over it twice. It was my signature, and I had not written it. I sat there and I looked at it for a long time. The mall had been learning me. I had known that for weeks. The PA, the directory, the voice in the store. It had been collecting pieces of me from everywhere I left them. The route I walked. The names I had written. The memories I had carried into the building with me. Every night, when I signed my full legal name, I had been giving it another sample. Every patrol, every scan, every footstep, every entry was a lesson. It had finally learned my signature. That meant it could write as me. It meant the logbook, the only physical record of who had been in the building and when, was no longer trustworthy. It meant the version of me that the mall was building, somewhere in its systems, in its directory, and its cameras, and its voice, was now complete enough to leave a paper trail. I understood, sitting there, what the rule about signing your full legal name had been for. It hadn't been to make sure you signed every shift. It had been to make you write it slowly, carefully, every time, to make you aware of what you were doing, so that you would notice, the way I was noticing now, when the mall finally got it right. The rules weren't liability instructions. They had never been liability instructions. They were the only thing standing between me and being absorbed, page by page, voice by voice, footstep by footstep, into a building that remembered everyone who ever walked through it and no longer had any living people to remember. I did not finish my shift. I left the logbook open on the desk. I left the keys on the desk. I left the radio on the desk. I took the company phone with me because it had the photographs on it, and I didn't know what else to do with them. I walked out the East Service entrance at 2:34 a.m. on a Thursday in February, and I drove home, and I called Halpern from my apartment at 6 in the morning, and I told him I quit. He didn't argue. He didn't ask why. He said, "All right, Daniel." He said, "Your last check will be in an envelope at the office. You can come pick it up during the day if you want, or I can mail it." I said, "Mail it." He said, "All right." He said, "Take care of yourself." He hung up. The check came 4 days later. It was the right amount. There was no note. I got a new job within 2 weeks, stocking overnight at a chain grocery store across town. The pay was lower. The hours were harder on my body. But the lights were bright, and the radio in the break room played top 40, and there were always at least 4 other people in the building. I told myself I had survived. I told myself I had gotten out in time. 3 weeks ago, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. It had no return address. The postmark was from the county where the mall is. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. It was a page from a security logbook. The same kind of paper, the same blue lines, the same date stamp at the top. The date stamped at the top was for tomorrow night. The entry slot was empty. The signature line at the bottom already had my full legal name on it, in my handwriting. The T in Marcus crossed exactly the way I cross it, the hook on the Y, the doubled S in Reyes. Above the signature, in the same handwriting, in the same blue ballpoint, was a single line. Checkpoint 3, East Service Corridor. Subject, will enter, store. I have not gone back. I am not going to go back. I want to say that with certainty. I want to be the kind of man who throws the page away, who burns it, who moves to another state and changes his number and lets the mall forget him the way it has forgotten the rest of its dead. But I keep the page in a drawer in my kitchen. I take it out sometimes and I look at it. I tell myself, I'm just confirming it's still there, that I didn't imagine it. That's what I tell myself. The truth is harder. The truth is that part of me, the part that grew up poor, the part that knows what gas station parking lots look like at 3 in the morning when your phone is about to be cut off, the part that learned to ignore fear because fear is a luxury. That part of me still thinks about the paychecks, still thinks about the warm apartment, still thinks about the eggs in the refrigerator, still thinks in the smallest, most tired voice that maybe it wasn't so bad, that maybe Carl had the right idea. 2 years of nights, head down, follow the rules, cash the checks. That voice is not loud, it is not in control, but it is there, and it sounds like mine, and I cannot always tell any more which thoughts are mine and which ones the mall taught me to have during 4 months of patrols. Tomorrow night is the date on the page. I am going to stay home. I am going to lock the door. I am going to keep the lights on. I am going to sit on my couch, and I am not going to drive out to the county highway. I am not going to park in the cracked lot under the buzzing sodium lights. I am not going to walk to the East Service entrance. I am not going to use the key I never returned, which is still on my dresser, which I have looked at every morning for 3 months and have not been able to throw away. I am telling you all of this because if something happens, if the page in my drawer is found there after I am gone, if my signature shows up in a logbook somewhere with tomorrow's date on it, I want there to be a record that I knew, that I saw the warning signs, that I was afraid. I want there to be a record that fear was not the problem. The problem was that for 4 months, I taught a building how to be me, one careful signature at a time, because I needed the money, and I could not afford to be the kind of person who runs. If you work somewhere that scares you, and you cannot afford to leave, I am not going to tell you to quit. I know better than that. I know what that advice is worth when the rent is due. I am only going to tell you this. Watch what you sign. Watch what you say out loud in empty rooms. Watch what you remember when you think no one is listening. Some buildings are paying attention, and some of them are very, very patient. And the worst of them know exactly how much your job is worth to you, down to the dollar, down to the egg, down to the last quiet hour before morning, when the fluorescents hum and the floor shines wet under your boots, and somewhere in a corridor you have walked 100 times, a voice you loved a long time ago is waiting for you to finally answer. I have not answered yet. I am very tired.